Okay, how physiological shunt works. So, shunting is basically that some amount of blood is not getting oxygenated. We are seeing that right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, and from there, lungs, the blood goes to the left side of the heart. So, when it passes through the respiratory system, the blood is getting oxygenated, but there is some blood in which doesn't go to the lungs to get oxygenated. So suppose 99% of the blood is passing through the lungs and it is getting oxygenated, say suppose 100% saturation of hemoglobin is occurring, but there is some amount of blood which doesn't pass through it, and what happens that it directly enters into the left side of the heart. So there is some unoxygenated blood and there is oxygenated blood, they mix together. So that is happening normally, that is known as physiological shunt. So this is basically the blood which is supplying the heart itself. So especially the left side of the heart, it drains into the left side of the heart. So that a small amount of unoxygenated blood mixes with the maximum amount of oxygenated blood, and what will happen after that, that there will be again, if there is initially 100% oxygenation of the blood, it will reduce. So we say that the blood is actually 97% saturated, it is not 100% saturated because of the mixing deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. So that's how physiological shunt works. So that is happening normally. Then there is pathological shunting also, which occurs in which alveoli collapse. So even when the blood is passing through the lungs, it doesn't get oxygenated. So if it is passing through an area where alveoli have collapsed, so that is a shunting is occurring, right? So that is oxygenated and deoxygenated blood will automatically mix. Any other question? Okay, how does respiratory change occur, and so what changes occur in excretory system due to it? Yeah, you have put up a follow up on that in respiratory alkalosis. So as the name suggests, respiratory and alkalosis, so there are two things happening. First we'll talk about alkalosis. See, whenever we are talking about acid base balance, always you have to first see what is the pH and then go for the cause, and then go that what is the compensation body is taking. That is the line of thought you have to think about. So always first see what is the pH we are dealing with. So obviously alkalosis, respiratory alkalosis, when we are talking, so alkalosis means pH is more, it is increased, isn't it? And respiratory alkalosis, the term means the cause is respiratory system. So how respiratory system can cause alkalosis? The respiratory system take care of some acids produced in the body, and this respiratory system takes care of basically volatile acid, which is basically they are being converted to carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is being excreted out of the respiratory system. So if our respiratory system starts, deep ventilation is occurring, so carbon dioxide will be excreted out too much. If carbon dioxide, which is an acid, is excreted out too much, obviously the balance will shift towards increased pH, right? So that will cause respiratory alkalosis. So hyperventilation is causing respiratory alkalosis. So hyperventilation is the cause of respiratory alkalosis. All right. So what should our excretory system should do to manage this alkalosis? Obviously pH is more. So to bring back pH, what it should do? Two things. One, excrete an alkali, because alkali is more, right? So it should excrete an alkali and it should retain an acid. So what it does, there is more bicarbonate loss and there is retention of hydrogen ions in the excretory system. That will shift the balance towards the our pH, right? So that is the main thing that excretory system does to it. What is the physiology of deep sea diving and other hyperbaric conditions? Okay. Simple, that there is a law in respiratory system that whenever the pressure goes high, when we are in hyperbaric condition, the gases dissolve more. So this thing you should remember. Pressure is high, the gases will dissolve in our lipid membrane more, right? So in deep sea, what is happening? The pressure, the atmospheric pressure is high. We are breathing at a high atmospheric pressure. So what will happen? The gases which are going inside, that is the nitrogen, oxygen, that is, they constitute the majority of the atmospheric air, right? So nitrogen and oxygen are going to dissolve in the lipid membranes. Both are going to dissolve. Remember this thing, both are going to dissolve. So that is why what we see is two types of conditions when we go deep sea: nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. Okay. Now oxygen, when which our body is handling, what happens that there is certain systems which can produce oxygen free radicals, and then there is a coping strategy also to deal with these radicals in the body, right? But if the radicals are produced too much, oxygen radicals are produced too much, our body will be overwhelmed. It will not be able to deal with that, isn't it? So there are two things, remember: nitrogen and oxygen, major component of the atmosphere. High pressure, they dissolve. Oxygen produces free radicals. So this free radical production causes oxygen toxicity, and dissolving of nitrogen in the lipid membranes causes nitrogen narcosis. Okay. So in deep sea, two things occur, remember, when we are going down into the deep sea and when we are coming up, right? So when we go down, because of more dissolving of these gases in the lipid membrane, we get nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. Okay. Now when we come up, whatever has dissolved in our lipid membranes, obviously when we are coming up, the pressure is going to decrease. So these dissolved gases, it will start appearing, right? They will start appearing as bubbles, and they will tend to go out. Now again, body has mechanism to deal with when these bubbles are coming out. What is that mechanism? Simple. Our respiratory system, it will try to excrete out of the gases because of our respiration. But if we come up too fast, whatever bubbles are coming out, again our respiratory system will be overwhelmed. So these bubbles will go and block various blood vessels, right? So various blood vessels, like it can block the CNS blood vessels, causing a stroke. Then they will block the bone blood vessels, right, causing bends. So choking occurs in the pulmonary system. So there are, wherever these bubbles will block, you will get problems. So in deep sea concept, you remember, two things occur when going down and when coming up. Going down, too much dissolving of the gases causes two things: nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity. Coming up, these dissolved gases are released back, they go and block various places. So that is where we get Caisson's disease. So what is the solution for that? Climb slowly up, right? So that our respiratory system is able to deal with the release of the gases. So that is why it is occurring. So I hope I'm able to, the concept wise, I'm able to answer your question, Neelam. Okay. Nervous regulation of breathing. Okay. Again, a very hot topic, very hot topic. Nervous regulation of respiration, very difficult to understand. In brief, I will tell you, but obviously it needs again major video on that. I'll tell you the concept of nervous regulation. So nervous regulation of respiration, it's respiration, generally we think like it is very different from that of heart. Actually, it's not. Respiration has a rhythm, isn't it? Like heart has a rhythm. We say, rhythmicity in heart. So respiration also has a rhythm, right? So this rhythm is generated by a rhythm generator. Like in heart, there is SA node. In respiration, also there is a rhythm generator, right? So that rhythm generator is the pre-Botzinger complex. Okay. But neural regulation of respiration is a little bit more complex. So we have various areas. There is dorsal respiratory group, there is ventral respiratory group, which are present in medulla, and there is another level of control, there apneustic center and pneumotaxic center, which are present in pons. So there are 4 centers and there is separate pre-Botzinger complex which is generating the rhythm. Okay. Now this rhythm, what happens? Basically when we are breathing at rest, right? What is happening? That normal tidal inspiration, it needs input, it needs contraction of the inspiratory muscles, isn't it? Inspiration is just relaxation of the inspiratory muscles. So it is not, it doesn't need input from top. So when the action potential is coming and going to the inspiratory muscles, there is inspiration. As the action potential stops, there is relaxation. So this rhythm generator sends information to dorsal respiratory group, which has inspiratory neurons. So what do these inspiratory neurons do? They send information to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord, what happens? There are certain alpha motor neurons which are supplying the inspiratory muscles, that is the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles. So it goes there and there is inspiration. So there is rhythm being generated, dorsal respiratory group of neuron, and it is going and exciting the alpha motor neurons of the inspiratory muscles. Then there is another center, that is the ventral respiratory group. It is for expiration. Okay. Now expiration, do we need it for tidal breathing? No, it is only the relaxation of the inspiratory muscles which is occurring, right? So what happens? This expiratory center, the neurons which go into the spinal cord, they are mainly occurring when there is maximum respiration, means over and above the tidal breathing. So they will go and excite the expiratory muscle. So that is the basic. There is more complication where DRG inhibits VRG and VRG inhibits DRG. Okay, so that is a little bit more complicated. We will not go into it right now. So DRG is for inspiratory muscle contraction, VRG for expiratory muscle contraction. Then there is another level, that is the pneumotaxic center and apneustic center. So somebody has asked apneusis, right? So we'll answer that question here itself. That apneustic center, what it does is, it is deep inspiration, more inspiration than the tidal breathing. So where should apneustic center send its information? Should it send to DRG or VRG? DRG is for inspiration, isn't it? So apneustic center promotes deep inspiration. So it sends a positive influence to the dorsal respiratory group of neurons. Okay. So apneustic center is there is a excitatory connection between, prolonged breathing, correct, prolonged breathing, Yogita, prolonged breathing, or I should say prolonged inspiration. Okay, so that it goes to the DRG. Okay, and it promotes that DRG should fire for more time so that inspiratory muscles keep contracted, or they contract more forcefully, so that there is deep inspiration, right? Fine. So that is a basic of apneustic center. Now what does pneumotaxic center does? So see, if apneustic center keeps on stimulating the DRG, what will happen? Deep inspiration will occur, but there should be something which should stop this inspiration, right? So pneumotaxic center acts as a switch for switching between inspiration and expiration, right? So you may say, why? What is the need of this? There is a rhythm center which is giving impulses, then only DRG is being active, right? But our respiratory system is not that simple. It's not only we do only that rhythm. There is no further regulation. Like I am speaking, what is happening? I'm taking deep inspiration, and then for during the expiration I am speaking. So if only that rhythm is active, will it be possible? No. We need different levels of control, that when needed there should be deep inspiration also. So apneustic center is sending the information. Now pneumotaxic center inhibits this apneustic center, that is stop. You're not no more needed. We need to exhale now, right? So main function of pneumotaxic center is to switch between inspiration and expiration. So that is the fundamentals of neural regulation of respiration. Now, before finishing, I'll just add a little bit about vagus here. See, vagus acts kind of a negative feedback. Okay. It is sending information to pneumotaxic center that stop breathing. See, I'll give you one example that apneustic center is sending information to DRG causing deep breathing, right? What it will lead to? It will lead to increase in the size of the lungs, right? So what is happening in the trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, in especially the lower division, bronchi, bronchioles, there's certain receptors there, right? So as a lung parenchyma is expanding, this portion, the bronchi and bronchioles, they are also expanding. There is a stretch. So information from there is detected by a sensor, a receptor is there, and travels, the efferent goes via the vagus. Okay. So it is kind of an information you have stretched too much, right? So that information goes to pneumotaxic center and excites it, switch off the inspiration. So then pneumotaxic center inhibits the apneustic center. So there is an inbuilt feedback which is in the neural regulation of respiration. Can anybody tell what is this feedback? Herring-Brewer reflex, if you have understood, if there is too much inflation, there will be vagus which is going and it is causing expiration, Herring-Brewer reflex. So that is the physiological basis of Herring-Brewer reflex. Okay, so I hope I have answered that question on neural regulation of breathing. There is again too many components are there. There are other reflexes are there. Then there is Head's paradoxical reflex also. Will not go into that. Okay, very beautiful question we have got. Thank you, Mandar, for that. Mechanism behind increased pulmonary resistance in hypoventilated alveoli. So pulmonary resistance, I mean, I think you are asking about blood vessel vasoconstriction. So first thing, I'll give you a concept here that, see, there are two types of circulation, systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. We divide it like that, right? From left heart to the right, that circulation is known as the systemic circulation. From right heart via the lung to the left heart, that is known as the pulmonary circulation. Now, this circulation responds differently to oxygen concentration in their blood. Remember, systemic circulation, pulmonary circulation respond differently to oxygen in their blood. Okay. Pulmonary circulation. I'll give you one example. Suppose we are exercising. In exercising muscles, what is happening? Oxygen is being used up and carbon dioxide is being released. Isn't it? So what will oxygen concentration will tend to go locally little bit down. What happens? Is there vasodilation or vasoconstriction? There is vasodilation in the systemic circulation. So when oxygen levels are going down in systemic circulation, vasodilation occurs. It's good also if logically, if you see that that particular tissue needs oxygen is going down. So inbuilt mechanism is there that decrease in oxygen causes increase in the vessel diameter so that more blood can flow in, isn't it? So that is helpful for that particular tissue. So in systemic circulation, there is vasodilation. But in pulmonary circulation, when oxygen concentration is less, there is vasoconstriction, not vasodilation. So systemic circulation, oxygen less, vasodilation. Pulmonary circulation, oxygen less, vasoconstriction. So that is the concept. Now let's come to your question that how it is occurring. So logically, do you think that is it useful that there should be vasoconstriction there? So somebody asked me about shunts there, isn't it? So I told that some alveoli, if they are collapsing, so what will happen? That blood will go. So this is a alveoli which is collapsed. Blood is going via this, but it is not getting oxygenated. Good or bad? Bad, right? So what happens if this is a collapsed alveoli? There is no ventilation. Air is not going inside. So obviously oxygen cannot pass through the alveoli into the blood vessel, isn't it? So what happens that this decrease in oxygen concentration locally in that particular blood vessel causes vasoconstriction. Good or bad? It's good. Why? Now, the blood which is entering the lungs need not go via this because it is already blocked. The blood vessel, there is vasoconstriction. So whatever blood vessels are open, the blood which is coming from the right side of the heart will go on to other blood vessels. Okay, so what is happening? It is going to the alveoli, which are nicely ventilated, isn't it? So it will get oxygenated. So if you see my video on diffusion across respiratory membrane, there I've explained that if blood moves faster, there will be more oxygenation. So that is happening. If more blood is going through a particular vessel, right, it will get oxygenated from the alveoli. So the useless alveoli, the collapsed alveoli, are bypassed because of this vasoconstriction. Now, coming to your question that why there is increased resistance, this is the answer. What is the reason for resistance? It is vasoconstriction. So if there is vasoconstriction, yeah, correct, Yogita, thank you. So if there is vasoconstriction, there will be increased resistance. So somebody had asked me also about high altitude. So in high altitude, that is the thing which is occurring. So initially what happens? Initially there are certain alveoli which are not being ventilated. Okay. Then what happens that in those particular alveoli, there is vasoconstriction occurring. So when it occurs in some alveoli, it is beneficial for the body. Body is coping up with the disturbance which has led to the problems, right? So it tries to cope up with that. But imagine if it is happening with too many alveoli, what will happen? It will cause too much pulmonary resistance, right? Too much pulmonary resistance, that means now our right ventricle has to pump against more resistance, isn't it? So normally if you see what is the pressure in the pulmonary circulation compared to systemic circulation, it is very, very less, right? Around maximum it goes to 25 millimeter mercury. While in systemic circulation it is 120 by 80 millimeter mercury. So here it is 25 10 by 10 millimeter mercury. So as it increases, the resistance increases, our right ventricle is coming under stress. It is like has to face so much resistance to pump, isn't it? So that is the problems which are occurring in high altitude sickness. Okay, so I hope I have answered your question on pulmonary resistance, Mandar. Okay, we'll go further. High altitude also is the basic concept is this only, that if it is like little bit manageable, body copes well, and if it goes beyond, then it becomes a problem with the body. Now that is a concept which is happening everywhere. If you see in shock, circulatory shock, if you try to recall it, there also same thing is happening, that till a limit the body is trying to compensate, the body is trying to get retain water via the excretory system. But after a certain time, what happens? Same water becomes problematic for the body. Our heart is not able to cope up with increased blood volume, and it starts failing further, and a positive feedback starts, right? So same thing, that body tries to cope up within a limit. It is able to manage. If it is too much, the disturbance is too much, then it starts failing and failing, right? So, okay, Mandar has not answered whether was it useful or not. Okay. What is the difference between lung compliance and elasticity, right? Now, again, a concept first I'll give you. Both compliance and elasticity are needed for normal breathing. They're two different things. Compliance is inversely proportional to the elasticity, right? So I'll give you one example. Think of a socks, right? Sock, you have bought new sock, right? So it can stretch, right? This stretchability is compliance. You leave it, what will happen? Sock will come back to its original position. This going back to the original position, the recoil, is elasticity, right? Stretchability is compliance. Leaving it, it is going back, it is recoil is elasticity. Okay. Now imagine two things, two types of socks. One which are very tight, too much tight they have made, and it is not stretching. What will happen? Will it be good or bad? It will be bad, right? You want to, when you are wearing it, it should stretch a bit, isn't it? And then it should come back. So if there is another sock which has lost its elasticity, it is kept loose like that. It is not going back to its original position. Similar is the case with the breathing. You need both. You need stretchability, compliance, as well as going back. So when do you need stretchability and when do you need going back? For inspiration, you should stretch, right? For inspiration, it should stretch and accommodate the air. So that is compliance. If there is problem in stretching, the air will have problem in going in, right? Like simple sock, if you see that if it is not stretching, you will apply more force, right? Your muscles are working more. Similarly for lungs, if lungs are stiff, what will happen? Your inspiratory muscles will have to work more, stretch your thoracic cage more, so that that stiff lungs, that non-compliant lungs stretch a little bit and air goes in, right? So that is the compliance. Next thing is elasticity, recoil. Why do you need the recoil? Because you want to expire also. There should be expiration, not expire in that sense, sorry. There should be expiration, right? So what happens that it should go back when the inspiratory muscles relax, the lung should go back to its original equilibrium position, and the air which is there, it should come out, right? So that is the difference between compliance and elasticity. But remember, both are needed. If there is a problem with elasticity, then also it's a trouble. If there is a problem with compliance, then also it's a trouble. Okay, so I'll give one example. Like in emphysema, elastic tissue is destroyed, right? So there is a problem with recoil of the lungs. Compliance is very good, right? So both are acting against each other. Compliance is very good. In fact, the compliance is increased. Okay, so the lung has problem in going back to its original position. So somebody in between asked about I think about static lung volume in case of bronchial asthma. Bronchial asthma also same thing happens, but I'll tell about that a little later. But this is a kind of where elastic tissue is lost. It will problem with going in. So your lungs will retain air. When it retains air, what do you call it? Barrel shaped chest, right? So right now air is less, right? And it is not going back, so air is retained. So that is known as this thing. Elasticity is lost. It happens in emphysema. There is increased compliance but decreased elasticity or decreased recoil. Okay, blue diamonds. I think I answered your question. Is there any follow-up question on that? You are blurring. I'm so sorry, Jatin. It's I don't know which network to use. All networks have a problem here. I'm at my home, so hopefully I'm clear. My voice is clear. I'm able to answer your questions. Okay. Apneusis, I answered. Altitude sickness, I kind of answered. Okay. Apneustic center cause prolonged breathing, correct. Oxygen therapy. Okay. Oxygen therapy is two types. Hyperbaric, we'll say hyperbaric oxygen therapy, we'll talk about it. And one is at atmospheric pressure, we increase the oxygen concentration. So, okay, why is this clear? Then I think it's fine. What is FiO2? FiO2. Have you heard this term, FiO2? That is fraction of inspired oxygen. Fraction of inspired oxygen. So somebody has asked me about, Neetu has asked about hypoxia also. So I'll answer these two questions together. Oxygen therapy and hypoxia I'll answer together. And there is one concept of cyanosis also, which I keep asking students, but they're so confused. So maybe I can add a little bit of that also here. Okay. So FiO2 is fraction of inspired oxygen, right? What is the fraction of inspired oxygen when we breathe atmospheric air? Fraction of inspired oxygen when we breathe atmospheric air. Anybody? No? Okay. So our atmospheric air, say it's what? 21% is oxygen, right? Most of it is nitrogen, 80% is around 78% is nitrogen, right? So 20 to 21% we say it is oxygen. So that is a fraction, right? Fraction of inspired oxygen. Now, at sea level, our atmospheric pressure is how much? 760 millimeter mercury, right? So what is the partial pressure of oxygen which we have inspired? 20% of 760 millimeter mercury is the partial pressure of oxygen which we inspire, right? So 20% is the composition. Out of all air, in that air, 20% is oxygen. Now, depending on what is the atmospheric pressure, at sea level, atmospheric pressure is 760 millimeter. It goes up. If you go up, then atmospheric pressure decreases. If you go deep, like in deep sea, atmospheric pressure increases. So, how do we calculate the partial pressure of any gas? Same 20%. The composition we have to take and calculate 20% of 760 millimeter at sea level is our partial pressure of oxygen. Now, how much partial pressure can this much attain in our lungs, in our alveoli, right? So when we calculate 20% of 760, how much it will come? I think it comes to 159 or 160 millimeter mercury, right? At the level of alveoli, after equilibrium, it becomes 100 millimeter mercury. So that is the partial pressure of oxygen which we should attain for hemoglobin saturation, right? So 100 millimeter mercury at sea level, we are attaining normally 100 millimeter mercury, and it causes around 97 to 98% saturation of the hemoglobin after mixing of oxygenated and unoxygenated blood, which we have already dealt. So what happens? So what happens is, in case of hypoxia, now which hypoxia are we talking about? One, that the air which we are breathing from outside, partial pressure is less. Total atmospheric pressure is less. So when we are going to high altitude, if total atmospheric pressure is less, we have to calculate 20% of the atmospheric pressure. What will happen? The partial pressure of oxygen in our blood will become less. If the partial pressure is less in our blood, what will happen? Will hemoglobin saturate? It will not be able to saturate, right? So there is a problem in the atmosphere. Yeah, hypoxia, correct. So if there is a problem in the atmosphere, the partial pressure in our blood is going down, right? So what we do? We change the atmosphere outside. How to change the atmosphere? How to change the atmosphere? So sometimes we tell, okay, don't climb too fast, come down, come below, right? So that is one thing. Second thing, what we do is we give external ventilation, so that like when these people go to high altitude, sometimes they carry oxygen cylinders, so they can breathe directly from that. So what you have done is that whatever is the partial pressure, say suppose it becomes 600 millimeter mercury at high altitude, 600 millimeter mercury is the partial pressure. So what happens if it is 100% oxygen, right? It is initially it is 20%, 100% oxygen. So you have to calculate 100% of 600 millimeter mercury. So two things, see, again and again we are talking two things. One is composition and one is partial pressure. So oxygen cylinders, what they are doing is, we have changed the composition. Instead of 20% of the atmospheric air, now it has become 100% oxygen. Or they may vary, oxygen cylinders, it may have a mix of like 80% of oxygen can be there, right? So what has become FiO2, fraction of inspired oxygen, it has become 100%. Okay, so 100% of 600 millimeter mercury we will calculate. So obviously you are breathing with the more partial pressure, so the blood partial pressure will be more. Getting the point? So that is oxygen therapy. Let's come to lungs. So whatever you are breathing, it is okay, but when it goes inside alveoli, it is not able to diffuse to the pulmonary circulation.